Good morning, North America. Welcome to Church Talk, lively conversation for all things church transformation. I'm your co-host, Dr. Bill Tenney Britton, in our studio in Columbia, Missouri, the heartland of the U.S. And I'm joined, as usual, by my co-host, author and denominational leader, Dr. Kris Tenney Britton, the area minister of the Northeast area of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ of Mid-America. Try and say that 3 times fast. Good morning, Kris.
Well, good morning, and welcome to Church Talk Live.
Bill and Kris Tenney Britton here today to talk about effective leadership in the mid-sized church.
Now, some of you are going to think, wow, this one's just for me because I'm in a mid-sized church. We're not talking about churches around 75 or 100 or that are somehow stuck in a middle. We're talking about churches that are averaging 300 to 800 people in worship. To catch that, 300 to 800 in worship attendance average. Now, before you say, well, my gosh, that's not me, you know, it could be. There are a lot of folks who never thought they'd get there. They didn't even think in those ways or whatever, and then they found themselves there. Or they found themselves searching and calling or out there being moved by their bishop and found themselves into one of these larger congregations. So we're thinking there might be something for you in this episode. So stay with us.
Well, and there's one other piece, is if you're leading a church that's under 200, but you're bumping up against that 200 mark, this is going to be an invaluable session for you because this will tell you what it takes to be the pastor of a church that has made that transition. And the key to breaking that 200 brick ceiling really is mostly putting into practice what we're going to be talking about. So, you know, if you're in that size church, hey, hang on. All right, well, you know, the first thing I want to say about this is that this whole session is that very few seminaries, and I haven't come across any yet, but I'm going to leave some room there. But very few seminaries actually prepare pastors to lead churches that are over 200.
Right.
In fact, and this is going to be sort of hard for some of you to hear, but the word pastor, the term pastor, and I don't see the bag is like it's all negative, but the things that go with being a pastor pretty much go away completely by the time you've broken the 200 and got to a mid-sized church. The pastoral care piece and all that really takes a way back seat, as we're going to be talking about here in a bit.
Sure. Well, and let's be clear. We've talked about this in other episodes about this change, the differences in the different sizes of churches. But you know, it's really important for us to know these things ourselves, because if you're pushing back and saying, "Well, I want to be a pastor," that's the main thing is to be a pastor to people. Then really do yourself and do congregations a favor and move into another congregation. Because the reality is none of us can have real relationships, pastoral type relationships with more than 100 people at a time. And so to do the kind of pastoring that a lot of us really want to do really just precludes us being able to pastor in these larger churches. So if you want to do pastoral care, awesome. If you want to be a pastor in a pastor-sized congregation, that's awesome. But please, if those are really important to you, then do not try to lead a mid-sized congregation or lead a congregation to mid-size.
Right, exactly, because that's disastrous for you.
Yes.
And it'll be disastrous for your congregation.
Yes.
And so really, a lot of these pastors who really succeed very well in these larger mid-sized churches and beyond have either business experience or some leadership experience beyond what they got in seminary. Now, that doesn't mean you can't learn that. And in fact, one of the things that I recommend young seminarians when they come out of school, if they want to lead your larger church, I tell them, don't go as a solo pastor to begin with. Go find yourself in an apprentice position or an associate's position or a staff position in a large church so you can see how it works and you can watch the lead pastor and other staff, how they interact. Well, with all that said, you know, the foundation being built, let's talk about what it takes to be an effective leader in a mid-sized church. And there's 3 keys here that I want to highlight. And these come from the book that Bill Easum and I have written on Staffing the Effective Church, which is coming out in 2012 from Baker Books. Look for it. And of course, the problem is we don't know what their real title will be, but it's on staffing the churches.
In the meantime, we do consulting and we do coaching. So those are always, as we say, really key pieces for a lot of us.
Right. So there's 3 pieces that we're going to be talking about. We're going to talk about the new skill set the skill set that a pastor has to develop effectively
Right.
to become that or to maintain and lead that size church. You also have we're going to talk about that they embrace some new values, and finally they reprioritize their time. And so those are the three keys that we're going to look at. And so we're going to start off with they develop a new skill set.
Sure. Well, one of the first parts, one of the key pieces of this new skill set is to keep the mission and the vision at the forefront. That you know what the mission and vision of your congregation is, and you keep it at the forefront. And if you don't have a mission and vision, then you're in a process to discover what that is. And
Well, if you're in a mid-sized church, you know what that vision and mission is.
Well,
if you've got to that place.
And it's effective, I'll agree, but a lot of people find themselves there and they're surprised and caught off guard. And it's like, oh my gosh. So you've got to know that mission and vision, and you've got to keep it in front of yourself and in front of the congregation and in front of your leadership as you get staff at all times. That's like day in and day out. Everything you do is measured. I know we're going to talk about prioritizing time, but you're going to be asking yourself, does this further or enhance in some way our mission and vision? So mission and vision are going to be at the forefront.
And you're going to keep it there. Number two is you're going to both understand and you're going to staff for the 4 core processes. Now, a lot of people don't know what those 4 core processes
of congregations. Let's be clear about this, right? These are the 4 core processes of congregations.
Right. And
what every congregation should have. This is what we're about.
Right. And you're working through these processes. I mean, the key is the process. And the 4 core processes are this. Get new people in the door. If you don't get new people in the door, you're not growing. You're not an effective church. Number 2, the second core process is you have to retain them. You have to keep them. You have to keep them with you long enough so that you can get to the third core process, which is discipling them. And the fourth core process is getting those people out, deploying them into ministry beyond the church, not into onto a committee. That's not the same thing.
So
here.
Into mission. Because ministry is what we do inside the church, and mission is what we do outside of the church. And there will be some who are doing some ministry. But you're also wanting people to be able to live out their faith 24/7, 365, over and over and over again. So they've got to have those pieces. Another skill that we've got to develop is hands-off ministry. Now, what that means isn't that you're not doing ministry, but your ministry is to hand off ministry. So you're handing off ministry. You're teaching your staff how to hand off ministry so that people have ministry to do. And you see how that's a little different than some of us do ministry, where we're like hands-on. We got to know everything that's going on. We got to do this. But we have to hand off, delegate. Out it goes. Not relegate, but delegate. Ministry. They say good leadership is about working yourself out of a job. And while some of us get really uptight about that, oh my gosh, how will I have a job? Well, because there's always more stuff to do. So we're developing, passing on, developing, passing on, and then it never ends.
Well, and this whole piece of handing off ministry is that the minister, by the time you're at a church of 500, the lead pastor is not doing any actual hands-on ministry. They've handed it all off. At 500, they're doing nothing that most pastors would do beyond doing some pastoral care with their core team, the leaders of the 4 core processes. And that's the only pastoring that would be recognizable by most folks. Everything else is, well, that's the next piece. They learn to lead once removed, which means that they're also satisfied with leading once removed. That means that they lead through other people. Normally they're 4 core leaders, but these core leaders are doing the ministry, or in the church of actually the size, those core leaders have people who are doing the ministry, and the pastor is accomplishing what needs to get done in the church through the hands of other people. They're not going around to help. They're saying, with the inviting person, for instance, or the person who is bringing people in, who's in charge of that process, is saying, okay, is this happening? How is it happening? And how can we help you to be even more effective? Who do we need to get? What resources do you need? But they're watching that happen and coaching them in it. They're not actually doing what we would call what is normally considered ministry.
I want to pick up on something you said because I know what you meant, but I also heard what you said. And you said about that they're working with that person, say, who's getting people in. In this model, I mean, to be that mid-sized church, no one person is doing all that work.
They're in charge of the processes.
Right. They're in charge of the processes. And so really they are facilitators of those particular ministers. You're not hiring an inviting worker or, somebody to do your invitation for you. When you're hiring staff at all levels of staff, you're hiring facilitators to help and facilitate others.
And in the book, in the staffing book, we call the difference between coaching and playing. And players are the ones, we're talking about using a metaphor in baseball, the players out there hitting the ball. And the coach doesn't get out and hit the ball. And all of your leaders have to be coaches. They don't get out into the game. They stand at the sidelines and they do the recruiting and they do the training and they make sure that happens. But the other people are the doers. And that's the biggest problem we have with smaller churches, is that they hire people to do ministry, and these leaders go on and do ministry, but the church can't grow because it stops with them. Churches that get mid-sized and beyond, they are hiring people who are leaders who lead, not leaders who do, which is, of course, the next piece, which is one of the skill sets that has to be honed to a fine tee, is that the lead pastor, hear clearly, the lead pastor has to be effective at hiring and firing, which means that they have to have the responsibility for hiring and firing.
Now, but I want to say this because I think if I were doing this all by myself, I would order this a little differently, because a lot of people, again, get really upset when they hear that, oh my gosh, I can do it. But it goes in hand with the two other skills in this skill set. One is that this lead pastor sets clear and measurable expectations for the congregation and for the staff. And they're responsible for holding the staff accountable. That in a very real sense, the lead pastor can say, the buck stops here with me. And that means if this is going to all move slowly, it's my responsibility to make sure that the staff is doing what they need to do, that they're as effective as they can be within these measurable expectations and goals that the congregation has, the congregation's leadership has agreed upon. And so it's not that you're in hiring and firing, you're giving your lead pastor willy-nilly permission to say, well, I don't like you and you're going today, or they're going to fire your beloved person. That this lead pastor is working within those expectations and needing to help, or not help, needing to hold people accountable. And when they're not, they have to have the not only responsibility, but the what's the word I'm looking for? The accountability. They have to have the authority. That's it. They have to have the authority to be able to say to somebody, if you don't get online, you're going to have to go.
Well, and often what we hear is pushback. Of course, we deal with this extensively in the book. But the way that this works is that the board, the council, the session, whoever it is that holds the pastor accountable, that's who they hold accountable. And the pastor is held accountable for the vision and mission, accomplishment of the vision and mission of the church. And the pastor then holds their staff accountable for their parts of that. And so if the pastor has a staff member who's not doing what needs to get done, the pastor has the ability to remove that person or to hold that person accountable to a higher level of behavior, of results. And if they don't have that, authority, then, well, frankly, you're not going to get to the 300 to 800 level. Right. That's just how it is. All right, the last skill that the pastor really needs to deal with,
develop.
Right, is they need to learn how to ask the right question. Right. Are they asking the right questions? Very often we ask the wrong questions. We ask, who's going to be happy, who's going to be affected by this. But in a church of this size, the key questions that a pastor needs to be asking is about processes. Is the process working? Is our 4 core processes, are they doing what they need to do? Are they accomplishing what needs to be accomplished? Are the processes within those processes doing it? Do I have enough staff? Do I have the right staff? Are my staff effective at what they're doing? This is going to sound very self-serving, but Am I happy and fulfilled? Is my family happy and fulfilled? Am I hearing and following the leading of the Holy Spirit? Are my staff functioning as a team? Are they happy and fulfilled? Those are the kinds of questions, and there's a bunch more actually, but those are the kinds of questions about strategies and processes and where the staff is and the leadership is that really make or break a church of this size. Oh, and the one that you probably need to be listening for is, am I measuring the right things? Am I measuring baptisms? Am I measuring people going into ministry and so on? Or am I just measuring the dollars that come in? Because although that's important, that may not be the key thing to measure.
Okay. Well, as we go, we're going to be developing this new skill set, or honing our skill set in some of our cases. And then we also need to, as you've said already at the top of this program, we've got to embrace new values. That what we value may be different if we have served in smaller congregations or larger congregations. That there's some real key values we have to carry, like one that we've already touched on: ministry through others. That our ministry will become a facilitative ministry where we can feel okay about other people doing the hands-on ministry.
And in fact, that's important. That's important enough that we're actually doing it. Remember, a value is something that's important enough that it changes our behaviors. And so we actually value seeing ministry accomplished through the hands, feet, and lives of other people. And of course, that means that we need to make sure and we value seeing others succeed in ministry and making sure they have the tools and the coaching, the resources available so that they can succeed. And we take inner satisfaction sitting in our office or being wherever we are saying, that's great. We're not worried about taking credit for it. We don't care about getting credit at this level. What we care about is that the ministry gets done and is effective.
Well, and why I love this value is that is another piece to people to answer back to people about the pastor having the authority to hire and fire. The key is pastors at this level will do everything they can that's sane, if you will,
and within their responsibility and authority,
and the expectations and whatnot, to help their staff people be successful. They'll say what's lacking, what's the problem, how can we get you the help that you need, and it really often only comes down to the person's the staff person in question either isn't willing or isn't able to get to what they need to do. But the safeguard against just that willy-nilly firing is this value of wanting to see people succeed in ministry.
Indeed.
All right.
All right. Well, here's one that's going to be very easy for me to say, but it's very hard for the general congregation, especially in smaller churches, to really get their head around. And that is that the pastor, the lead pastor, reshapes their values of, if you will, who's important. That the kingdom is more important than the church. And the church, the congregation that they serve, is more important than any one individual. And that if one individual, no matter how beloved and how effective they've been at this level here or in the past or whatever, if they're holding the church back, if there's a problem with this individual, if they can't get on board, then the pastor has no choice and has no compunction either removing this person or moving this person into another position or setting this person aside out of leadership and moving on. That kingdom first, church second, individual, if you will, dead last. That the good of the church way outweighs the good of any one individual. And I know that doesn't sound very...
Yeah, I don't like the way you said that, but
the mercy gift of a pastor of this size has got to be pretty low.
Sure.
If they're going to accomplish the ministry.
But I do want to say that there are ways to do that. You say dead last, but for a lot of us, kingdom, church, and individuals, they come kind of close because we highly value all three of those. But you always have to come back and do kingdom, church, individual. And the other piece of that is we don't always feel good about that. I mean,
That's right.
Even with the mercy piece, it's, you can have got to watch. You've got a high mercy gift, but you can have that intermediate mercy gift there, but it's still going to take that back seat to, and what is right is going to click in.
Exactly right.
Right, justice will overcome mercy in a way, I guess you might say.
Right.
All right.
Okay.
Okay. So,
exactly.
well, here's another one, and that is another value, and this is the last of the values we're going to talk about today, and that is multiplication. That everything is about multiplying the kingdom and really multiplying your congregation to be able to multiply the kingdom. So that your leaders are going to be, let's see if we can say it's multiplicative, and your worship services are going to be geared towards that. Locations, you're going to be looking at how do we do this ministry not merely here but in other ways. How do we multiply our ministry? How do we multiply mission? So they have pastors in this mid-sized church have this value of multiplication. Status quo is not good enough.
Well, and addition is not even good enough. That we're not adding this. We have to be looking at multiplication.
Right,
and so every leader, every legitimate leader in a church of this size has an apprentice, has someone that they're bringing up so that they have, if you will, redundant systems in place. So that if X leader is somehow incapacitated, and you know that does happen, that there's someone who's already trained, ready to step in, and that leader it multiplies or is raising up someone else. And the whole goal, of course, is to multiply your worship services, so you have more worship services than you had in more locations, and you're multiplying leader after leader after leader. And that's the whole mindset of the lead pastors. They're always looking, are we multiplying? This is important. Are you doing it? And so they're, if you will, in the face of the staff. Hey, who are you multiplying? Who's your new leaders this week? Who have you identified? And that's an ongoing theme because it's one of their core values. So ministry through others, seeing others succeed, kingdom, church, individual, and the multiplication of leaders. Those become the key values and the core values, if you will, of an effective mid-sized church leader.
Good, good. All right, well, you might realize through all this that you're also going to have to reprioritize your time, because you're going to think, oh my gosh, how am I going to do that? Well, it means you're going to let some things go. And one of the questions we commonly will ask people is, imagine your ministry at your next level. What are you going to have to give up to do that ministry?
And the next level would mean double the size that you are now, no matter what size you are.
So 50 people in your congregation, you're looking at 100. What are you going to have to give up to be able to be a pastor in a church of 100? You're at 100. What are you going to have to give up to pastor at 200, 150, 300? You get it. So
But it's more than just imagining that.
You have to start doing it.
You have to do that to grow that church. You have to be leading here so the church will come up.
Right. And it's hard.
It's very
because
difficult.
In a way, what you're doing is straddling both, because you can't just start one day and say, I'm not doing any of this anymore. You've got to do both, and then you let one go and the other one is going to pick up.
It comes back to that skill set of learning how to hand off ministry,
Right.
hand off ministry. And of course, at this level, the mid-sized church, 300 to 800, you are adept at that. It's not a new skill. You've become adept at it because otherwise you can't lead a church of 300 to 800.
Well, and unfortunately, though, churches at this size do call pastors that are not adept at that, and we watch the churches grow down. Okay?
Exactly.
So if you're losing, let's try it again. If you're losing people in your worship services, and you're a year to 2 years in to a new pastor, maybe a little bit more, but generally you can see it within 1 to 2 years. And if your numbers are down, say you've been worshiping at 500 and you're down to 450, 400, you're on your way down. And it's probably because your pastor is not yet adept at leading a mid-sized congregation. So what you really need to do, if you're investing in your pastor, is get a coach. If you're one of those pastors and you're finding this situation on your hands, maybe it's time to have a conversation with one of the Tenny Britons about what your gifts, your skill sets, what your priorities are. We've seen pastors say, my gosh, I don't want to take on that skill set. But we've also seen pastors who've really geared down and they're just moving and they're going and they're growing with their churches.
Right. So let's talk about reprioritizing
time. Okay.
And the first thing that is noticeable in a pastor of a 300 to 800 member church or a worship-sized church is how little time they spend with the average non-leader member of the congregation. In fact, they spend virtually no time with non-leaders of the congregation. Now, that doesn't mean that they won't do a funeral or a wedding or even make the odd hospital visit on occasion, but they do that so rarely that most people can't remember the last time they saw the pastor in their home.
But the pastors are going to show up often at events or whatever, they're visible. And what I find to be very, very interesting is to be in these larger sized churches and people feel like they have a personal relationship or they know the pastor because part of how the pastor shares himself or herself in the worship settings, and how they move about and how they're seen. And I've been in several churches where people have actually brought their guests up to the lead pastor. They've sought out the lead pastor and said, Pastor so-and-so, I want you to meet my friend so-and-so. And the pastor doesn't have a clue the name of that person, but that person has felt this connection. So this isn't about disconnect, but it is that you really don't have the time to develop relationships, primary relationships with folks.
And going back to, if that's something that's very important to you, don't lead a church this size.
You'll go crazy.
Right, exactly. And the church will grow down. Okay, but go ahead.
Yeah, well, I was going to say the trade-off is you get to spend, if you're one who really likes to spend significant time, you get to spend significant time with your staff. And wow, what fun you can have with your staff and the treasures of getting to grow your staff and the fulfillment of getting to watch your staff be successful and be leaders in their own rights and raising up other people. So that's going to be a major priority. You're going to be meeting with your staff on a regular basis. Now, we disagree, I think, about what a regular basis may be, and it may have to work, but it's pretty hands-on, at least in those initial stages.
Well, and it depends on whether you're the pastor of the 300-member or average attendance church or an 800 average attendance church, but somewhere in the middle, you're really going to be working with 4 key people. Your 4 staff members, the staff members are your 4 core processes, and you're going to be working with them. My general sense is you normally work with them as a group once a week in a staff meeting where you're not going over the calendar, because you can do that by email or you can just look at the calendar. But you're working on those values. Hey, what new leaders have you brought in? How are things going with thus and such the processes and so on? So you're doing a group time, but you're also doing one-on-one time. Generally, I say once a week. A coaching seminar, if you will, or a coaching appointment where you're asking them, how are you doing? Did you achieve the goals that you set? What's keeping you back? What's holding you back? And setting, again, what we call SMART goals that are specific, measurable, achievable, realistic,
reachable,
and time bound.
Sensitive. Yeah.
So you're setting these goals and working forward with them. So
okay, but let's say this: the other thing you're going to do with your staff is you're going to pray with them. And when I've done staff meetings, we tend to meet after a while, and the staff is pretty bonded every 2 weeks to once a month as a staff, because they're already interacting in and amongst themselves. You got to build that team if you don't have that already. But you are going to do that one-on-one every week, and don't forget the prayer time. And it's not just the little parenthesis open and parenthesis close. It's sitting there in silence and allowing God to speak. Yeah, that's a piece of what you're going to be doing with folks as well. Okay, well, another way that we're going to spend our time.
And actually, we're going to spend a majority of our time here.
Majority of our time networking with the unchurched.
We're outside of our office. You just don't do a lot of ministry in your office. Although the larger the church, the more office time you're going to be spending in terms of putting together a message, a sermon that does what you were saying, build those relationships. Yeah. But that becomes one of your primary jobs and your primary vision casting and whatnot. But the majority of your out time is going to be spent with unchurched people. These are new people who have visited the church or have potential leadership abilities, or beyond that, being, if you will, the face of the congregation outside with the Chamber of Commerce, with other business leaders, with serving with the hospital board or community board,
school board. How are you going to serve? How can you serve?
And we're not talking about running for office. We're talking about school board, but we're talking about you're out there as a representative, but you're more than a representative. You're building a relationship with key leaders. Of course, the goal of all networking with unchurched people is to bring them into a relationship with Jesus Christ, and hopefully into your church, but not necessarily, because remember, kingdoms first, church is second. So you're spending time out there with the unchurched.
All right, so because we're running short on time, I want to make sure we get to this fourth piece, and that is that you want to spend time with pastors of the next size church. You know, again, very few pastors have had experience of serving on larger church church teams in any way, or church staffs that maybe they've seen them from the pews. But if you don't know where you're going, you're likely never going to get there. And so to get to spend time with larger church pastors, next size up, to see how they minister, or how they pastor, how they lead, and try to do it with more than one, because a lot of times we just try to emulate somebody else because we like that person. But when we get to sit with several people, then we get to see what we like and we dislike, or what works for me and what doesn't work for me, so that then we're able to build up our own skill sets.
Well, and remember that the thing you're looking for with these pastors of next size churches is you're looking for the new skill sets you will have to develop. What do they have that you don't have?
Yes.
You're going to look for the values that they're carrying that you don't yet have, and you're going to look for how they spend their time. And effective churches that are growing, those are the ones you want to hang out with, and you want to look and, again, as you say, weigh up what works for me, what doesn't work for me, what can I incorporate, what do I need to say, yeah, not for me. But you're going to spend significant time. These become, if you will, some of your best coaching and best learning opportunities that you're going to have, and that means you're going to have to spend some time with these folks. So your time is not with the congregation, it is with your staff, it is with the unchurched, and networking the community, and spending time with the pastors of these next size level churches. And that's, if you will, in a nutshell, what effective leadership in a mid-sized church takes. Hey, we're out of time.
We are.
And we will see you next week.
Have a great week.